Why did I say to pardon my French before? Was it because I am not very good at speaking French and don't have a French accent?
Voulez chanter, voulez entre nous. Oh.
No, it's because of horseshit. Yes, that's right, horseshit. Up until this time, the horse-drawn carriage was a preferred method of transportation in New York City, and it was ugly. Blog No Fracking Consensus has been watching the climate world since 2009, and she says what she sees isn't pretty. She brings to our attention the book Super Freakonomics by Stephen Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner, which draws heavily from the work of Eric Morris, whose urban planning master thesis explored the reality of horse-based transportation in 19th century cities. Further, she says, Morris points out that by the late 1800s, large urban centers were drowning in horse manure. Not only were there no solutions in sight, people were making dire predictions, such as in 1894, the Times of London estimated that by 1950, every street in the city would be buried 9 feet deep in horse manure. One New York prognosticator of the 1890s concluded that by 1930, the horse droppings would rise to Manhattan's third-story windows. Further, she points out that the 15 to 30 pounds of manure produced daily by each beast multiplied by the 150,000 horses in New York City resulted in more than 3 million pounds of horse manure per day that somehow needed to be disposed of. That's not to mention the daily 40,000 gallons of horse urine. In other words, cities reeked. As Morris says, the stench was omnipresent. Here are some fun bits from his article. Urban streets were minefields that need to be navigated with the greatest care.
Hey! I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
Crossing sweepers stood on street corners. For a fee, they would clear a path through the mire for pedestrians. Wet weather turned the streets into swamps and rivers of muck, but dry weather brought little improvement. The manure turned to dust, which then whipped up by the wind, choking pedestrians and coating buildings. Even when it had been removed from the streets, the manure piled up faster than it could be disposed of. Imagine you're outside eating in a restaurant in Manhattan. This isn't the type of sanitary environment you want to be eating your dinner, lunch, or even breakfast in. So what got rid of all this horse manure? The automobile. You go to Wikipedia in the history of automobile, it says by 1900, mass production of automobiles had begun in France and in the United States. If we go over to the Internet Archive, archive.org, we find a magazine called Stage, published in 1936, and it was about Broadway theater, and everybody knows with Broadway theater you always go out to dinner. And they have a couple interesting articles in this one particular magazine about Sidewalk Cafe and our favorite cafe owned by the Bustanoby brothers. In Dining and After Dark advertisements, it says, the nightlife of the city seems to be entering a new phase. With the advent of more and more cabarets, it would appear to us quite likely that the craze started a while back by the Bustanoby brothers in their Beaux Arts Cafe will have become, when the fall season gets underway, the dominant characteristic of a great many of our night places. Other red signs of a widespread indulgence in the various new rag dances, notably the turkey trot, which, it is true, can be seen already here and there. We, however, cannot envisage the pleasure seekers of this town jumping up and down between dinner courses or rushing madly from place to place to make their own entertainment in this silly fashion.
Better hurry and let me and ain't you going? Where you going? Ain't you going? Where you going? Who's really the man? Ragged music man? Oh my honey. What? Oh my honey. What? Let me take you to Alexander's Slam, 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 Slam. Ain't you coming along?
Be that as it may, the outstanding restaurants and hotels listed below will present the august beleaguered New Yorkers and visitors from out of town ample amusement, relaxation, and the opportunity to circulate wealth. Arrowhead Inn, the Astor Roof, and then Beaux Arts. The immense success of the Thursday night soirees in this foremost artistic French restaurant and cafe has prompted the Bustanoby brothers, the proprietors, to give a simpler entertainment every evening after the theater. These artistic gatherings are patronized by smart bohemians who demand good things to eat.
What do we got for dinner?
Anything you like, sir. You might have some tomato juice, orange juice, grape juice, pineapple juice.
Hey, turn off the juice before I get electrocuted. All right, let me have one of each. And 2 fried eggs, 2 poached eggs, 2 scrambled eggs, and 2 medium-boiled eggs.
And 2 hard-boiled eggs.
And 2 hard-boiled eggs.
And have become a unique feature of metropolitan life. They put bohemians in quotation marks. That would be like the hipsters of today. Music and entertainment from 7 p.m. until closing time, with no interims between 9 and 11. The table d'hôte is $1.50, and there are private rooms for parties of 4 to 100. Ask Louis Bustanoby to serve you the new cordial Forbidden Fruit. You'll find it nowhere else in town, and don't be alarmed if you should see ladies sitting at the bar.
You can't do that!
The sidewalk tables have now been removed, for eating here was fraught with all sorts of hazards, what with rag muffins jeering and throwing stones, and street dirt settling thicker than volcanic dust on your food. It is the opinion of this department that New Yorkers will never take to this sort of thing, at least not until the automobile comes into its own. It's at 80 West 40th Street. So that's interesting. They say that automobile has not reached critical mass in this article, and they actually do believe that when the automobile does, then sidewalks cafes will take off. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but first I'd like to read a part of another article from the same magazine called Whither Are We Drifting? You know, the nightlife, eating, dining, and entertainment. Talked about rooftop dining, which I think is fantastic. The exact opposite of eating out in the street, in the gutter, which I still think is kind of gross. Now, the quite opposite would be a beautiful rooftop garden. And I'm going to skip to that part. Over at the Astor, they opened a while back a roof garden, and the lights of the town glow around the beneath you, twinkling, winkling like glowworms, and those new flashing electric signs they're beginning to put up everywhere. New York's a beautiful hell at night. And one thinks of false friendships, the untrue love, the crushed hopes in such a place. Will come to our rooftops more and more as time wears on, I think. They can be made into veritable gardens, and what if some of the flowers are made of papier-mâché? Aren't half the people just as unreal? How can you tell false from true?
You are fake news.
This is the garden of make-believe, a magical garden of make-believe, where flowers chuckle and birds play tricks, and a magic tree grows lollipop sticks.
And speaking of eating outdoors, I spoke to Jacques Bustanoby about sidewalk cafes, and several years ago he nervously put out a few tables at his Beaux Arts Cafe with a low hedge to half conceal them. A few brave customers ventured in to dine there one summer evening. Amy and I were 2 of them, and all went well for a while in our Parisian retreat. Then some little hoodlums, gutter snipes, discovered our vague forms behind the arras. Pebbles were soon showered over us, followed by rough, jeering cries, and Amy's organdy dress was spattered with soup. My white shirt was spotted with hollandaise sauce, and we actually had to dash to cover. Jacques took away the tables after that. New York isn't ready for all its appropriate climate for al fresco dining. If you call it that, as I did the other day, some dumbbell will think you're alluding to a dancer at the Hippodrome. So while this Stage magazine was written in 1936, and of course those 2 articles were written in 1935 or 1936, the cover story theme of the magazine was 1911. You see, it was about 25 years since 1911. If you read the editorial, let us make believe. It says, let's pretend we're 1911, slipping off 25 years just as they've never been. Imagine, please, for the sake of illusion, that these pages of Stage are written, illustrated, and sent to press not in July 1936, but in July 1911, and that they are presented to you in the manner which Stage would have employed had it existed at that time. And that they are presented to you in the manner which Stage would have employed had it existed at that time. And it also says that this issue in your hands is an attempt to recapture, in picture and text, and in idiom and fact, the glamour of after-dark entertainment as it was known in New York 25 years ago. And it goes on and on. This is really, really a great magazine. I would recommend taking a look at it. I'll, of course, put a link below on my channel where you can